At exactly 6:13 a.m., the security camera caught her, HOA President Karen, sneaking through the fog wearing a neon vest 2 sizes too small, ducking behind my hay bales like she was auditioning for a low-budget spy movie. She held a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other, whispering commands to her so-called inspection team, like she was leading a SEAL operation. If I hadn't been sipping coffee and watching the footage live, I might have thought I was dreaming. But no, Karen was really crawling through my fence line like she owned the land, and she had backup. The inspection team turned out to be 3 of her most loyal HOA board members, all equally overdressed and underinformed, armed with tape measures, magnifying glasses, and what looked like laminated neighborhood bylaws. They moved in formation, scanning the property with an intensity that would have made a crime scene unit jealous. One of them, Derek, a retired accountant who once fined me for aggressively stacked firewood, was already jotting down notes as if he'd uncovered a criminal operation by the chicken coop. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, wearing boots, flannel, and a confused expression that quickly morphed into controlled fury. This wasn't just nosy HOA behavior. This was an orchestrated ambush. And the worst part? I hadn't received a single notice, warning, or courtesy call. Karen hadn't even knocked on the door. She came onto my land like she had a warrant signed by the president, waving her clipboard like it was a holy relic. I hollered down toward the fence, but she just turned and waved with her usual fake smile, shouting something about emergency compliance procedures and urgent visual audits. I knew what this really was: payback. Just a week earlier, Karen had tried to pass a rule banning livestock within view of the road, clearly targeting my ranch, even though I'd lived here 20 years before the HOA existed. When the community voted her down, she stormed out mid-meeting and swore, "This isn't over." Well, apparently this was her grand sequel, Operation Surprise Inspection, and I wasn't about to let it end with her measuring my shed like she was ready to bulldoze it. I strolled down toward the gate as calmly as I could, suppressing every urge to shout. "Karen," I called, "you want to explain why you're trespassing before sunrise with an entourage." She gave a smug little shrug and said, "HOA Code 17B allows for surprise property inspections in the event of compliance emergencies." I received an anonymous tip about unauthorized structures, unpermitted fencing, and possibly illegal feed storage. I nearly laughed. Anonymous tip. Was it your own voicemail again? She ignored that and gestured for Direct to start photographing the barn. I stepped in front of him. "This is private land, not HOA common grounds. You don't get to play sheriff out here." But Karen had planned for that too. She whipped out a printout from the county GIS map and pointed to a thin stretch of the property that overlapped with the community green belt land I had been maintaining out of kindness for years. "This sliver right here," she said, "gives us jurisdiction to inspect any adjacent space for environmental impact." That's when I stopped playing nice. I tapped into my phone and pulled up the ranch's security app. I'd had a few bad encounters with wild animals and trespassers in the past, so I'd invested in a little upgrade: motion sensors and remote control gates for the dog paddock. With one tap, the side gate clicked open. The moment the latch released, I heard them. 3 loud, excited barks echoed through the early morning air. Then came the thundering of paws on dirt. Out bounded Rusty, Chief, and Luna, my trio of oversized, overenthusiastic, and overprotective livestock guard dogs. Now, to be clear, they wouldn't hurt a soul unless that soul was threatening a sheep or stealing from the feed bin. But they looked like wolves that ate gym memberships for breakfast, and their favorite game, Chase the Invader. Karen's team turned just in time to see 300 pounds of happy canine muscle hurtling toward them. Derek screamed. One of the others dropped his measuring tape, and the third actually dove into a patch of weeds to hide. Karen, to her credit, didn't run. She tried to stand her ground, holding out her clipboard like a medieval shield. Rusty skidded to a stop inches from her and licked it with such force that the papers peeled off and flapped away in the wind. "Call them off," Karen screeched. I folded my arms. "Why? They're just inspecting. You said inspections were allowed." She glared at me as Luna started sniffing her shoes and Chief tugged on the loose strap of her walkie-talkie. Direct tried to scramble away but got tripped up in the irrigation hose. I couldn't help it. I laughed hard. Eventually, I called the dogs back with a sharp whistle, and they trotted back like champions, tails wagging, tongues hanging out, perfectly proud of themselves. Karen, however, was fuming. Her vest was torn, clipboard demolished, and her dignity somewhere back by the chicken pen. "This is a violation of protocol," she barked. "I'm filing an official complaint." "You do that," I said, "and while you're at it, explain how you entered a no trespassing zone posted every 10 feet. I pointed to the signs. High-definition cameras caught every second. Want the footage emailed to the board, or should I just upload it straight to the HOA Facebook page? That shut her up. She gathered what little remained of her clipboard and marched off, muttering about lawsuits and safety hazards. Her little team followed, limping, dusty, and traumatized. I watched them retreat, dogs at my side, sipping the last of my coffee. Inside, I downloaded the video files and saved them to 3 drives. I had a feeling this wasn't the end of Karen's crusade. No, this was just her opening act. But what she didn't know, what she learned soon enough, was that this ranch didn't just run on soil, sweat, and livestock. It ran on preparation, and she had just walked headfirst into a landowner who wasn't about to let a clipboard warrior win. Let the games begin. 2 days after Karen's surprise inspection failed so gloriously, my mailbox began choking on paper like it had an allergic reaction to bureaucracy. The HOA had officially launched a full-scale complaint blitz. Every envelope bore their stiff logo like a wax seal of petty vengeance, and each letter inside listed violations more ridiculous than the last. Apparently, my chickens were now classified as noise pollutants. The barn's red paint was too visually aggressive, and someone had anonymously reported that I had an unregistered agricultural structure hidden behind my silo. One letter claimed I was housing more than the HOA recommended number of goats for spiritual harmony. I didn't even know that was a guideline, let alone one enforceable by law. I knew exactly who was behind this. Karen had lost the inspection war, and now she was trying to drown me in paperwork. She was hoping that if she buried me in enough citations, I'd throw up my hands and sell the place, or worse, give her control. What she hadn't accounted for was the fact that I had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to fight back. I started organizing everything, scanned, categorized, and color-coded every complaint. I even printed out an old zoning map and started sticking push pins into areas that Karen had flagged just to see if there was any pattern. Sure enough, there was. Each complaint lined up almost exactly with the angles covered by a drone camera. That's when it hit me. The footage she was basing this on wasn't just guesswork. She was spying on the ranch. The very next morning, I saw it. A small black drone buzzing near the tree line, like a fly with a clipboard. It hovered just above the barn roof, tilting side to side as if trying to get a panoramic shot of my haystack. I waited until it drifted a bit closer to the house, then quietly stepped onto the porch with a garden hose in hand. I set the nozzle to jet mode and waited. When the drone dipped within range, I let it rip. A single hard blast caught the rotor just right, and the thing spun out like a drunk mosquito and crash-landed in a flower bed. I walked over, picked it up, and brought it inside. It was one of those mid-range models, clearly not something a random neighbor would just send up for fun. I cracked open the micro SD card and popped it into my laptop. Sure enough, there were dozens of videos. My barn from above, the dog paddock, even a close-up of the irrigation system. It felt like a violation, and not the kind Karen was whining about. This was surveillance, and it reeked of desperation. I mailed the drone back to the HOA office inside a box filled with chicken feathers and a note that read, "If you want another look, try visiting like normal people. P.S. My rooster wants royalties if you keep filming him." That must have hit a nerve because the next day I received a hand-delivered letter from Karen herself. She didn't knock. She just slid it under the gate and stormed off in a huff. The letter, typed in a suspiciously large font, was a formal citation for a missing outdoor structure permit for the small storage shed I'd used since 1998. She said it had been reported as newly constructed, and therefore subject to review and potential demolition. The funny thing was, I had submitted a permit for that structure years ago, before the HOA even existed. I remembered it clearly because the paperwork had been an ordeal, and the inspector back then had been late and angry about a lost wallet. But after digging through 3 file boxes and blowing the dust off an ancient folder labeled County Zoning 90s, I realized the permit was gone, just vanished. Not in the old files, not in scanned archives, nowhere. It didn't make sense. I called the county office and requested a reprint. The clerk on the phone sounded sympathetic, but when he searched the archive, he said, "That permit ID doesn't show up in the system anymore." I asked if it could have been purged. He hesitated. Only if someone requested an archive deletion, which usually needs board approval or a legal order. That set off alarm bells in my head. I asked who'd been accessing the archive recently. He paused again. "There's a note here that a board member from your HOA requested a digital audit 2 weeks ago. It was signed by someone named Karen W." I didn't let him finish. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the wall for a minute. Karen had dug into county records and somehow managed to erase my permit to fabricate a violation. This wasn't just overreach anymore. This was manipulation. I didn't trust the HOA appeals process to fix this. I needed something more solid, something that would not only clear my name, but publicly expose what she'd done. That meant I had to find the original permit the old-fashioned way. After a long night digging through boxes in my grandfather's shed, I found what I was looking for. Tucked between an old ranch journal and a Polaroid of a barbecue in 1999 was a yellowed carbon copy of the permit. It had a stamp, a signature, and a reference number. It was as real as it got. I took photos, made 10 copies, and locked the original in a fireproof box. Then, just for flair, I added a cover letter addressed to the entire HOA board and attached photos of the shed from 2002, complete with my little cousins playing hide and seek around it. I titled the packet The Barnyard Files, a historical correction, and mailed one to every board member. No sarcasm, no threats, just facts and evidence. I didn't hear from Karen for 3 full days after that. Not a single envelope, not even a complaint about the rooster crowing too loud. It was eerie, like the silence before a thunderstorm. I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Karen didn't retreat. She recalculated, but she'd made a mistake now. She'd stepped out of her HOA sandbox and tried to rewrite history with a pen she wasn't qualified to hold. I wasn't going to let that slide because if she wanted to play dirty, she was about to find out that ranchers don't play. We dig, document, and defend. And she had just woken up every part of me that loved a long, hard fight. 3 days of silence from Karen was too good to be true. And sure enough, on the 4th morning, I opened my gate to find a bright orange envelope duct-taped to the fence post like a warning sign. It was a fresh fine notice from the HOA. $500 for non-compliance, failure to register historical structures, and emotional distress caused to board members. I read it twice, then laughed so hard I startled a hawk off the barn roof. Emotional distress? From what? My guard dogs drooling on her clipboard. The fine was signed by Karen alone, with no indication of board consensus or any legal basis. It was the HOA version of flipping me the bird in calligraphy. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me cornered. But all she did was hand me another opportunity to bury her in her own stupidity. Still, I needed to make a point, and not just with paperwork. The HOA had made it clear they wanted to escalate things, so I decided it was time to get creative. I planned something that would make a statement loud enough to rattle the windows of that bland HOA office. It started with a flyer, colorful, innocent, and just annoying enough to get Karen's attention. "Celebrate Rural Heritage Day at the ranch," it said. "All residents invited for a full livestock experience, including hay rides, open barn tours, and the legendary goat parade." I printed 200 and tacked them up at every community bulletin board I could find, even slipped a few under mailboxes. I knew Karen would see it, and I knew it would make her blood boil. Saturday morning came bright and early. By 9 o'clock, The first families were already arriving with their kids. I had folding chairs set up, coolers full of soda and tea, and my niece running a face-painting station where you could get whiskers and horns drawn on your cheek. The highlight of the day was the goat parade. Of course, I dressed all 10 of them in colorful vests that said things like Certified Emotional Support Goat, and this goat is HOA compliant. As the parade rounded the curve and passed in front of the HOA office, which conveniently shared a road with my ranch property, I saw her, Karen, standing in the window, mouth agape, arms folded so tightly she looked like she might implode. I didn't stop there. I brought out my 2 friendliest cows and let them meander around the visitor parking lot. One laid down right in front of the HOA entrance, like a bouncer at a barn-themed nightclub. I made sure the kids had plenty of chalk to draw flowers and smiley faces on the sidewalk leading to the HOA building. And when Karen finally came storming out with a face redder than a tomato in July, she stepped directly into a fresh pile of goat droppings. That was the moment someone's phone camera clicked, and I knew that photo would be online before the hour was up. She tried to shout over the music, demanding I remove the livestock and the decorations immediately, citing noise violations and health code. I calmly pointed to the boundary marker just feet from the HOA office step. Everything behind that line is my land, I told her. Karen, this is a peaceful gathering and celebration of our rural culture. Surely the HOA supports neighborly bonding. The crowd laughed, mostly because they could see the steam practically rising from her ears. Karen started shouting that she was calling the sheriff, and I welcomed it. I even offered her my phone, but she stopped, probably remembering how that went for her the last time she tried pulling rank with law enforcement. Instead, she tried confronting the cows, as if shooing them with her clipboard would do anything. One of them turned, gave her a look of absolute disinterest, and sat right back down. Karen stormed off, slipping again on the same patch of chalk she'd stepped over earlier, her hands flailing like windmills as she staggered away. By that afternoon, videos of Karen versus the Goat Parade were already circulating online. One clip had been edited with circus music. Another had added a scoreboard tracking the number of steps she took before slipping. The HOA's official Facebook page was flooded with comments, mostly from amused residents who found the event wholesome and hilarious. But it wasn't all fun and games, at least not for Karen. Her pride was bruised. Her complaints had backfired. And now her own board was beginning to question her sanity. I heard whispers the following week that some board members were calling for a special meeting. Apparently, they'd had enough of Karen's antics too. The flood of complaints, the secret drone footage, the emotional distress fines. It was starting to look less like leadership and more like obsession. A few board members even came by the ranch casually, under the pretense of checking in. They asked how I was holding up, complimented the parade, and one even said his kid wouldn't stop talking about the goats and vests. That told me everything I needed to know. Karen's grip on the board was slipping, but Karen wasn't finished. That much I could feel in my bones. The woman didn't know how to quit, and sure enough, late one evening, I noticed a white SUV parked just past the tree line near the community green belt. It was idling, headlights off, with someone inside clearly watching the ranch. I made a show of walking toward it with a flashlight, and just as I stepped onto the trail, the engine roared to life, and it sped off into the night. I didn't need a license plate to know it was her. The next day, I received an email, not a letter, not a posted notice, but a digital message from Karen herself. It was short, smug, and full of veiled threats. She said she was calling a board meeting to formally address my open defiance and would be recommending new emergency bylaws to grant the HOA more enforcement power over adjacent landowners. The audacity of it nearly floored me. Karen had lost every round, made a fool of herself, and yet still believed she could rewrite the rules in her favor. But this time, I had momentum. I had the public, the footage, the documents, and now the sympathy of a board growing weary of her madness. All I had to do was keep the pressure steady and the facts clean. No yelling, no drama, just the truth served with a side of goat cheese and popcorn. Karen had fired every shot she could think of. Fines, fake permits, even emotional warfare. But what she didn't know was that her biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was forgetting that out here, we don't just fight with fists or fines. We fight with patience, evidence, and a very long memory. And I was just getting started. When Karen called the emergency board meeting, she must have imagined it would be her moment of triumph. In her head, she probably pictured herself standing at the front of the community center, clipboard in hand, receiving standing ovations from board members for her brave leadership in taming the so-called rogue ranch. But that's not what happened. Not even close. What she didn't count on was that the tide had turned. Not just online, not just in the neighborhood whispers, but right in her own ranks. Her obsession with my land had made her reckless, and now the people she once controlled with intimidation and bylaws were watching her unravel in real time. I didn't even have to attend the meeting in person to make my presence felt. I had already sent in a formal letter through my attorney, one of the best rural property lawyers in the state, a woman with a soft voice and a sharper tongue than any bullwhip. She was known for dismantling overreaching HOAs with nothing more than zoning maps and 2 sheets of paper. Karen didn't know she was coming. That was the surprise. The meeting started with Karen attempting to take charge as always, standing at the front with a projector and a slideshow titled Ongoing Violations and Emergency Compliance Measures. Her first few slides showed grainy screenshots of my property. Pictures clearly taken from drone footage she still hadn't admitted to owning. Then came the fabricated violations, each more absurd than the last. One bullet point claimed I was maintaining a hostile livestock perimeter. Another accused my fencing of creating a psychological barrier to community harmony. I wasn't there, but multiple people recorded the whole thing. I watched it that night with popcorn in one hand and a notepad in the other. Then came the moment that changed everything. My attorney stood up. She hadn't been listed on the speaker schedule, but she'd submitted her credentials ahead of time, so legally the board had to hear her. She approached the front with a calm confidence and pulled out a single folder. Karen looked stunned. The attorney introduced herself and then said 5 words that silenced the room. "We are filing a countersuit." Karen blinked, confused. The attorney continued, "We are suing the HOA for defamation, illegal surveillance, trespassing, and emotional harassment. We have video evidence, signed witness statements, a recovered drone with intact memory storage, and official confirmation that a county permit was unlawfully deleted at the request of your president. Additionally, we have evidence that Ms. Karen Dully manipulated HOA procedures to target a private landowner in retaliation for a failed motion. We believe criminal charges may apply." Karen sputtered, trying to interrupt, but the attorney raised a hand and said, "I'll be brief. We're not just here to defend my client. We're here to ensure this HOA is held accountable, and we're asking for the immediate suspension of Karen Dully from all board activities pending a full investigation." The room went quiet, not awkward quiet, heavy quiet, the kind of silence that falls when people realize they've just seen the person in power step off a cliff they didn't know was there. A few board members exchanged glances. One even leaned forward and whispered something to another while flipping through a copy of the packet the attorney had passed out. It contained everything: screenshots of Karen on my land, drone footage, timestamps, a full list of the baseless complaints she filed, and a side-by-side comparison of my shed's original permit from 1998 and Karen's edited complaint. Karen tried to defend herself, of course. She claimed she was acting on anonymous tips, that she didn't know the drone had crossed legal boundaries, and that the inspection was within her rights under an emergency clause. That's when another board member, Sarah, a quiet woman who had rarely spoken up before, stood and asked a simple question. "Karen, who gave you authority to initiate these actions without board approval?" Karen hesitated. Then she said, "I added an emergency powers clause into the HOA charter last quarter. Section 8B. Everyone flipped through their folders, looking confused. My lawyer pulled out a printed version of the HOA charter and said, "There is no Section 8B. The room shifted again. People sat back. Chairs creaked. A few started whispering. Then one board member asked aloud, "Did you falsify a governing document?" Karen tried to recover, saying it was a proposed amendment still under review, but she couldn't produce any evidence of a vote or approval. And that was it. Someone called for a vote of no confidence. And right there, in front of cameras, residents, and half the neighborhood watching from their phones, the board voted to suspend Karen Dalu pending a formal review. The motion passed 8-1. The only dissenting vote came from Durek, who looked more like he regretted everything than actually believed in her anymore. That night, I sat on the porch with my dogs around me, watching the sunset behind the barn. My lawyer had done more in one meeting than I could have done in 10 parades or 100 sarcastic notes, but I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to go quietly. The next morning proved me right. At dawn, my motion sensor went off. I checked the security feed and saw Karen once again trying to sneak onto the property. This time she was alone, dressed in all black like she was in a spy thriller. She carried a plastic bag filled with what looked like used pesticide containers and fake blueprint papers rolled up under her arm. She knelt near my shed, glanced around, and began arranging the items like a bad movie prop scene. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to plant evidence. I didn't even have to intervene. The cameras caught it all, and this time, I didn't whistle for the dogs. I called the sheriff. Within 20 minutes, a cruiser pulled up, and Karen was still there, adjusting her fake scene like she thought she was clever. When the deputy asked what she was doing, she panicked and claimed she'd found the items and was documenting a violation. The deputy asked whose property she was on. When she stuttered, he read her the sign: no trespassing, video surveillance. Prosecutors had already been notified of her overreach. He called it in, cuffed her on the spot, and put her in the back of the car. She screamed that it was all a setup, that I had tricked her, but she knew she was finished. Everyone did. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting what was mine from someone who thought rules didn't apply to her. She had declared war on a ranch but forgot that ranchers don't back down. We dig in, we stand firm, and we fight with facts, not fear. Karen had underestimated the land, the law, and the people who lived by both. And now she was going to learn the cost. Karen getting hauled off in handcuffs should have been the end of it. For most people, that would have been rock bottom. But not Karen. She came out of it snarling, blaming everyone but herself, claiming I'd framed her, that the cameras had been tampered with, even suggesting the sheriff was in on some bizarre plot to destroy her reputation. But what she didn't know was that her time at the top had already expired. The moment the deputy closed that cruiser door with her inside, the HOA board had officially decided to move forward with a formal vote to remove her from the presidency entirely. And once the investigation reports from the county came back, confirming the deleted permit records and the unauthorized drone flights, they didn't just vote to remove her. They permanently banned her from holding any position in the HOA again. That alone was satisfying, but what came next sealed the whole saga in history. The lawyer filed civil charges for trespassing, harassment, and attempted property defamation. Karen settled out of court within 2 weeks. She tried to keep it quiet, but in a town like ours, silence spreads rumors faster than fact. Word got out she paid a 5-figure settlement and was required to issue a public apology. That part she fought tooth and nail, but the board made it a condition for letting her keep her house. She finally agreed to read the statement at the next community event, though she nearly choked on every word of it. The HOA, now operating under a new board president named Maria, an older lady with a soft voice and steel in her spine, reached out to me personally. She wanted to make amends and invited me to co-host a community gathering at the ranch. At first, I hesitated. The last time I let HOA folks on my land, it ended with clipboard sabotage and dog drool. But Maria insisted it would be peaceful, lighthearted, and most importantly, free of drama. She said the board wanted to thank me for my patience and resilience during the Karen crisis, as it was now informally known. So we planned a barbecue. Nothing fancy, just good food, live music, and a few shaded tables set up by the barn. My niece offered to do face painting again, and I promised to bring the goats, vests included. On the morning of the event, the sky was clear, the grass had just been mowed, and the dogs were freshly bathed. For the first time in a long while, there was peace on the ranch. Not silence, but peace. the kind that comes from knowing you've weathered a storm and come out standing stronger than before. People showed up in waves. Neighbors who'd never spoken to me before stopped to shake my hand. Some brought desserts, others just stories. I heard at least 3 different versions of the goat parade incident, each one more exaggerated than the last. At one point, someone asked where the guard dogs were, and just like they'd been trained to do, Rusty, Chief, and Luna trotted out from behind the barn right on cue. They were wearing new collars with shiny tags that read, Community Compliance Crew. Someone laughed so hard they dropped a plate of ribs, and then, without warning, Karen appeared. She wasn't invited, but she wasn't banned either. She stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded, eyes scanning for anyone who might support her. No one did. She walked stiffly to the microphone, where Maria gently gestured for her to keep it short. Karen cleared her throat, took out a crumpled piece of paper, and began reading. Her voice wavered at first but grew steadier as she went on. She apologized for her conduct, for abusing her role as HOA president, and for creating unnecessary division in the community. She even mentioned my name, acknowledging that she had wrongfully targeted a resident who had done nothing to deserve the scrutiny he received. It wasn't heartfelt, it wasn't warm, but it was public, and it was official. When she finished, no one clapped. No one booed either. She turned, walked off, and disappeared behind a line of parked cars. That was the last time I ever saw her. After she left, the energy lifted like a weight had been pulled off everyone's shoulders. The music kicked back in, the food kept coming, and the goats started dancing, or something close to it. At one point, someone handed me a plaque. It had been made by the local woodshop kids and read Defender of the Land, for valor in the face of HOA nonsense. I laughed until I cried. I mounted it above the front porch the next morning. Later that week, Maria called to say the HOA had officially revised their charter to include clauses protecting adjacent rural properties from arbitrary inspection, enforcement without evidence, and abuse of administrative power. She said it would be called the W clause, and then added that the W didn't stand for Karen's last name. It stood for warning. That made me laugh even harder. But the best part, hands down, came 2 weeks later when I got a letter from the sheriff's office. It was brief, just a thank you note really, but it included something unexpected. An offer to deputize the dogs as honorary members of the community's Rural Patrol Initiative. It was symbolic, of course, but it came with shiny little badges and a certificate signed by the sheriff himself. I framed it and hung it inside the barn, and now when people visit, they see a wooden plaque above the door and a certificate on the wall that together tell the story of what happens when you try to bulldoze a ranch with a clipboard and a grudge. This wasn't just a win against Karen. It was a win for everyone who's ever been pushed around by someone who thought a title gave them power. Karen came at me with surprise inspections and drone cameras. I answered with facts, patience, and a few well-timed appearances by a pack of loyal dogs. She tried to tear me down, but all she did was give me the platform to show what rural resolve really looks like. I still keep the footage just in case. I keep the documents, the screenshots, the files, not out of spite, but because the land teaches you one lesson above all else. Prepare for storms even when the skies are clear. But for now, there's quiet. The chickens are clucking, the goats are sunbathing, and the dogs are curled up beneath the oak tree, finally off duty. And on the gate leading into the ranch, there's a brand new sign that reads, "No trespassing." Smile for the cameras.